Welcome back. Today we're talking with the experts from Land O'Lakes Purina Feed, and we had a great discussion going before the break, so let's get back to it. If we're feeding cattle in the weaning phase, our objective is to essentially precondition those calves for the next phase of their lives. That may be in a retained ownership program or as replacement heifers or simply to offer them for sale as feeder calves. Regardless, having a sound preventative health program is essential. We go now to Dr. John Mahoney, Director of Veterinary Services for Land O'Lakes Purina Feed at the Longview Animal Center, to speak more on this subject.
The key thing that we're trying to achieve, and this is something that everybody has to focus on, is that there's a big difference between giving shots and actually properly immunizing the animal. The ultimate goal is to have circulating antibody in these calves that will help protect them from developing clinical disease when they're exposed to disease pathogens through the marketing or finishing channels. Certainly one of the tools that we use to do that is using solid vaccination protocols. Generally, as we look at vaccination protocols, it's very important to consider trying to do it at the optimal time when those animals are not stressed, where their immune system may not be functioning appropriately. Fundamentally, it's the right thing to do. With the consumers' increased focus in on animal care issues, appropriate antibiotic use, it is important to really keep our vision and focus on food safety and animal care to make our system most efficient and effective.
Well, obviously health is very important, as we just heard from Dr. Mahoney. Dr. Scott, I want to go back to you and ask, what is the role of nutrition in making sure those calves get off to a healthy start?
Well, Kevin, nutrition and health are very, very interrelated, and it's kind of hard to separate them. For example, if cattle get sick, the veterinarian will blame the nutrition program, and the nutritionist will blame the vaccination program. And the reason why is it's so hard to separate them. But if everybody's healthy, then everybody takes credit for it, right? So the key thing that we know is this: when cattle are sick, they don't eat, or they don't eat as well. And as I mentioned earlier, when they don't have as much nutrition, then we've got trouble with those calves responding to the vaccination program. So we like to talk about more eating, less treating, because those cattle that are eating, they are the ones that have a less chance of becoming sick. So again, it's all about palatability and management too, because there's some management factors in there that sometimes are overlooked, that some people don't really recognize that this could be an issue.
Well, I want to follow up on that, and Dr. Helt, I'd turn to you. You know, I agree, if you have a right nutritional program, it's going to help from a health standpoint, but they got to eat it before they can benefit from the nutritional program. So how do you get these balling calves to eat and drink?
You know, what we really need to look at is first, water. I've talked about it before, but are we cleaning the water tanks? Is it a clean water tank? And we need to be diligent about that. The more cattle drink, the more they eat. So I think we need to look at that first. Another thing that we really need to consider is pen size or pasture size. If we're weaning into a dry lot, we really need to look at square foot per head, 150 square foot per head. We get less than that, you're going to have probably some mud issues, the urination and some of those things. It's going to smell like ammonia, and that's not good for the animal. So we need to watch that square foot. And if we get too big, the cattle won't come to the bunk or the feeder, whichever we're working with. And in a lot of cases, we really need to consider splitting those weaning pens in half with some panels for a short period of time to drive those cattle up to the feed source to make sure they start eating. If we're using our bulk feeders with one of our complete programs, a pretty common thing and a pretty easy thing to do is put those feeders perpendicular to the fence line, so when those calves do start to walk the fence, that they run into it and start to nibble on those cattle or on the feed that's in those feeders. If we're using a bunk line, we need to sure consider multiple day feedings, and a lot of people do that, but that's going to help us increase intake. And even a trick of you know, just running the feed truck or a pickup by the bunk is sure going to help draw some excitement. Maybe I'm going to get something to eat, and they'll come up and eat some more. So some of those little things we really need to think about and talk through to get those cattle up and eating.
Those are great tips. Ted, a lot of these preconditioning programs extend well past the weaning phase, right? And
Sure.
So tell us a little bit more about the next phase and how these programs fit in.
Well, once we get our calves started on feed, everybody's learned how to eat, they've learned, adjusted to their environment, they know where they're at, then we want to, and they're healthy, then we will move them on to a grower program to hold those cattle together, get some additional weight, and in a lot of ranches, it's to use up some additional resources because they have extra forage. That forage that's standing there, once the snow hits it, it's no good anymore, so we need to utilize that to get the maximum return we can on our ranch. That's where the growing programs are all about, and it's just like we talked about in the starting program. We need to find out what that rancher has available, and then we can fit the growing program to supplement what they have everywhere from real high quality grass to a drought situation, no forage. We've got complete growers also. The other thing to keep in mind is the same palatability tricks that we want to use with the starters that we keep the cattle up on feed. Then the growing program, we still want those growing diets to be very palatable because we're going to feed them in lower amounts, but we're also going to have silage or fresh grass, something else for those cattle to eat. We want to make sure they come up to that growing diet every day so that we don't lose our immune status and everything else that we gathered or got together in the weaning program. We want to keep it all together and keep those cattle right on growing because, like Dr. Scott said, cattle that eat don't get sick, and sick cattle won't eat. And we don't want to get them started good and then have them get sick after we're 2 days before the sale or something like that. So keep them going, keep them gaining, and you'll have a much more marketable calf when you're done with that.
Well, as we think beyond that cow-calf segment, I'd be interested to hear, Dr. Helt, what you're hearing from some of your stocker or feed yard customers about the value they place on these kinds of preconditioning programs.
That's kind of become the hot topic here as of late with the value of these animals, either going into a stocker operation or a feed yard operation. The level of money that we have to deal with now is really extreme. And so those folks are really saying that a 45-day ranch wean preconditioned program that's got the shot component or the animal health component, the palatability, the eating component fine-tune is going to be pretty critical down the road because the value of these animals is so big. We need to make sure they're off to a good start, as Ted said, for that next phase. And it sure appears that there's probably some discounts for those cattle that aren't set up right going into either a feed yard or a stocker operation.